Hey guys, Jordan Light here with my brother Josiah, looking at stock market cash flow. Today we're looking at the first chapter. We're focusing on education. Education is a concept. So, Josiah, you're a college student. What's the first thing you think of when you think of education?
Homework.
Yeah, I hear you there. Now, how does it change if we say formal education? What do you think of then?
Definitely was the school setting, you know?
Right, a student and a teacher. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in the book Stock Market Cash Flow, it's actually a self-help book, an educational stock market book, but it's really a different setting. It's informal. Um, so I'm going to show you my screen real quick and show you some of the things that Andy Tanner is talking about when he writes Stock Market Cash Flow. When he talks about education, he says education equals transformation. Um, if you're not truly educated, you've never changed. Um, I think this is really important in a world that's over credentialized, like our world is. Um, Everybody's got all kinds of letters about after their name, but they don't seem to really know anything that applies to the real world. I don't know. Have you seen this ever, Josiah, in the college setting that you're in?
The yes, I think so. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Um, and so Andy Tanner talks about education. He says education comes from the Greek word that means to bring out or develop. In essence, it's bringing the potential within us and it's manifesting that within our life. Um, it's, it's pretty deep. It's a pretty deep concept. Um, there's one other thing he talks about. So we're talking about stock market. We're talking about making money. So when someone says, "Hey, I've got a hot tip for you," I heard Dell's going to go way up. Is that a good education? What do you think, Josiah?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Hot tips. First, it doesn't sound very good. I wouldn't. I don't know. Just the presentation of it. But also, I remember that conversation you and I had, Jordan, which is you make investments based on what you know and the knowledge that you have.
Right. So if someone says, "Hey, I've got this hot tip for you. I have insider information," or my brother-in-law told me this thing, does that make you an educated investor?
I wouldn't say so. You aren't that person.
Right.
That's on the inside.
So if education is something that transforms you, a hot tip is really just something that distracts you. I think is that fair to say, you think, Si?
I'd say so.
Okay. The next thing Andy Tanner talks about quite a bit is he talks about building context and content. Now, when he uses these words, he's using them in the realm of education, in the sphere of education, and he says you've got to build both a context and a content. Your context would be like building a glass, and then content would be like filling the glass. So, what we want to do as lifelong students is we want to build a glass, if you will, a container for the content, for the water. Um, it's a framework, it's a paradigm. So, in a context of a lifelong student focusing on stock market cash flow, paper investments, we need to understand uh, the different roles that people play within that sphere. And we also then want to fill it with content. And what that means is specifics. What is a call? What is a put? How do these things, what do they mean? How do these things relate? moving on, he says education, still talking about context and content, works in a continuum. Once we build that context, we want to go from an empty glass or ignorance to maybe a glass with a little bit of water in it, awareness. Competency would be a half full glass, and then proficiency. That's a glass that's filled. That's someone with context and full of content, able to execute. Proficiency. Okay, Josiah, when you hear the word proficiency, what are you thinking of?
Proficiency. That would be being well known, right? If you're proficient, you're well known, but you're good at it also. You're very well, right?
Would you say Shaq was a proficient free throw shooter?
He was well known at it, that's for sure.
But he wasn't any good at it, was he?
Yeah, no, he wasn't proficient, I guess.
Well, let's shift this over to the world of the stock market cash flow. So let's move to paper assets. What about a paper asset guy like, say, Jim Rogers or George Soros? They had the Quantum Fund. That was their baby. Would you say that they were proficient as hedge fund managers of the Quantum Fund?
Yes.
They had high proficiency, right?
Yeah. Successful.
Not only did they understand the paradigm of how paper assets work, they were able to apply that knowledge, to apply that content, and capitalize on it. And so that's ultimately what we want to be able to do. We want to take our knowledge and be able to apply it. All right. So we've talked about competency versus proficiency. And now let's look at something called the cone of learning. Now, the purpose of all this is to help us be better educated to apply our knowledge in the stock market. Mm-hmm. So when we look down here at the very bottom of this cone of learning, it's an inverted pyramid. We see that after 2 weeks, we tend to remember 10% of what we read. We retain 20% of what we hear, 30% of what we see. When we combine what we see with what we hear, we can retain up to 50%. Seeing it done on location, watching a demonstration, perhaps an emotional experience like a movie. I think the key is actually over here on this right-hand side, though. The nature of the involvement for everything we just talked about was passive. You may have been engaged in the lecture. You may have been entranced by the movie or into your book, but you're still passive. You're not tactile. You're not plugging in your emotions. You don't, if we're talking about sports, you don't feel what it's like to be tired and have to shoot the free throw. You don't feel the sweat or the pressure and reacting under that circumstance. So when we go to this top half of this graph, we see that after 2 weeks, we retain 70% of what we say, and I'm going to add into that also what we write, and 90% of what we say and do. Now, these are both active ways to learn. So when we present, which is one of the reasons we're having this conversation right here over YouTube Live, 70% or 90% of simulating the real experience, which is why we're going to be in a group and trading, and 90% of doing the real thing, learning from real life experiences. Okay. So there's just a couple house cleaning things, or housekeeping things, I should say. And then Josiah, if there's anything else you want to add, go for it, okay? But the housekeeping things, you guys will see in the thread where you can get the book Stock Market Cash Flow. By this time, you should already have it. To those of you who couldn't join us tonight. Also, look at the video number 1. It shows you how we're going to be trading. and practicing our paper trading. So check that out. Josh does a great demonstration of everything you need to know from the website to how to get signed up. And that'll be in the thread as well. And the third thing is, if you can't join us during this time, get in the thread, get with us after the fact, and we'll go from there. All right. That said, Josiah, if there's any big takeaways you want to reinforce that we talked about tonight, go ahead and do that now.
I don't really have anything to add. The cone of learning is really accurate, I'd say, because that's what, whenever I'm learning best, especially right now in accounting, I guess. I have this buddy, Jake, and we go over it a lot. So we say it to each other a lot, and we actually do it. I mean, granted, that's the homework, it's making you do it, but that really reinforces it. That's
awesome.
It's just super, I don't know, very relevant, very relevant.
So you learned it in class, passive. You then presented it to him when you talk about it. And then you actually practice putting the numbers in the correct classification or in the correct area. So you're practicing what an actual accountant does.
Right.
Right? Yeah. So you've moved from the passive into the active so that it sticks in your mind.
Right.
I dig it. Well, thanks for that, Josiah, and we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah.